I'm so glad to be here. It's really a privilege to get to be up here and talk to you guys as parents. I will start this off by saying I'm not a parent, so want to get that right out of the way. I'm not coming here from the perspective of a parent. If you want that, talk to my dad. He's right over there. He can tell you all about his experience. But I am coming to you as a perspective of not only someone who professionally works in the area of mental health, so a little bit about kind of my career so far. So I worked for the first couple years in adult, like older adult settings, and then for a while I actually was like, why did I get into social work? And then I started working at mental health crisis stabilization, and that is when I remembered why I went into social work, because it reminded me of my own personal experience growing up. So today I come to you not just with the professional stuff. In fact, that hat I will take off for a few minutes at some point and just talk about my own lived experience as a person who has attempted suicide and also struggled with suicidal ideation at multiple times in my life. But before I do that, I just want to pray really quick and just thank God for life and thank God for today and for everyone being able to make it tonight. Father God, I just pray that you enter this room right now, that your spirit just falls upon all of us, God. I just pray for everyone in the room who either has struggled, who knows someone who's struggled, who has a child who's struggling, or a parent who's struggled, God. And I just want you to put your comfort all around them, God. And I pray that the words that I speak are straight from you, that the education and just the information and the conversation that comes out of tonight, God, that's all through you and your words, not mine. I pray all this in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So, suicide, how do you make a conversation about this? It's hard. I want to start off by saying it's a heavy topic, and I know that you might have walked in here feeling heavy. So while I'm not gonna, keep it lighthearted, I'm gonna try my best to keep it lighter, because I know some of us may have recent or experience in this area that maybe would be triggering. And so also, if there's any issues, if you feel triggered at any time, if you feel like you need to step outside, or you want to talk to me after, you want to talk to someone after, I will be after for a little bit. I'll be here, and feel free to step out if you need to take a break. I'm not offended, I promise you. Okay, so let's get started. I have my handy dandy slides. So, first slide. So tonight we're gonna do a really quick truth or myth, because I think there are a lot of myths surrounding suicide and the idea of suicide. So that's going to be first on our agenda. And then I'm going to provide some statistics that are specific to youth and just in general the younger population. A few populations that fall under youth that are more susceptible. I'm going to tell my own story, take the social worker hat off for a minute and put on the lived experience. I'm going to talk about some of the warning signs that are often associated with people that either are experiencing suicidal ideation, who are contemplating attempting suicide, or who have attempted suicide. And then I came up with this acronym myself, kind of. I'm sure I stole it from like several different other acronyms. But this is kind of the one that I want to use tonight, which is CAT, even though I'm not a cat person, I'm a dog person. Connect, ask, and treat together. So this is kind of going to be how the lens that I'm showing all of this through. And lastly, at the end, I'll provide some resources if anyone wants to know more or has any questions. So let's go ahead and get to our little truth or myth, or true or false. So number one, and if you want just, we can just, I guess, throw it out. I'll ask true, false. So talking about suicide or asking someone if they feel suicidal will encourage suicide attempts. How many people think it's true? I'm actually amazed. A lot of people, yeah. How many people think it's false? Now that I gave away the answer. Okay. Yes, it is false. A lot of people think that asking somebody if they're feeling suicidal or if they've ever thought about suicide is going to be something that triggers them to actually start thinking about it or to do it. And that is definitely false. Research shows it's false. The second one, young people who talk about suicide never actually attempt or die by suicide. True? False? It's false. So young people who talk about suicide, although we always hear this famous, oh, they're looking for attention. I know I've heard that a bunch of times from, various people, either in the media, what people are saying, wherever. But that is definitely false. A lot of people who do end up ending their life typically had some kind of, whether it was preoccupation with death or mentioned death, brought up death. That's usually one of the warning signs. Number 3, suicide attempts or deaths happen without warning. I kind of just gave that one away. True? False. So almost always, yes, it's false. So almost always there is a warning. There's some kind of warning, and it can be subtle, and that's why I'm going to go over some of the warning signs. But just to give an example, even at work right now, I have someone who's currently in the pediatric ICU who is recovering from a suicide attempt. And there were warning signs, but not the ones you would think. And so that's just an example of how, maybe in the initial month before there weren't really warning signs, and in fact the warning sign itself was that she was all of a sudden doing great, but there were warning signs. So yeah, that's definitely a false. And then the last one, once my child starts feeling better, the suicide risk is over. True? False? Yes, it is false. So, as I just said, here I am spoiling my own questions. But yeah, so honestly, one of the biggest indicators is when someone's been struggling for so long, and all of a sudden it's like that flip the switch where they suddenly are, I'm in a great mood, and they seem to be maybe even acting like themselves, but nothing ever recovers that fast. And it's something that is just, it can be a warning sign in itself. So that's my little quiz for you. So next I'm going to go into a little more heavy topic, which are some of the statistics. So as I put up there, according to a study in 2017, which was done by Lifeway, 1 in 3 Protestant churchgoers have been personally impacted by suicide. And that doesn't mean that 1 in 3 have attempted, that just means they've been impacted. So that means they know someone, they are that someone, they've thought about it. That's a lot. That means 1 in 3 of every single one of you here has experienced that, and it could be everyone here has. These numbers, that was in 2017, pre-pandemic. Who knows what is now? What I will say is that even today, according to youth.gov, which is kind of like the WHO, the World Health Organization, but focused on youth, their website. So suicide remains, because it was back when I was in college, the second leading cause of death among the nation's teenagers now. Back then it was college students. The statistic that I read online just last night from this website was that now it's ages, I think, 15 to 27. So the age has started to go down, and younger kiddos are being impacted by this, and their families. So in 2019, 1 out of 5 youth reported that they have seriously considered attempting suicide at one time in their life. And again, I would argue that that has gotten even more just based upon what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing. I haven't even seen the statistics, but do we really have to? I think a lot of us already kind of know the pandemic after the pandemic that's happened. And then 1 out of 11 have made a suicide attempt, and that is specifically those young people. And this number increases with other risk factors, which we call in my field multiple jeopardies or double jeopardies. But in this case, it would be an additional jeopardy, such as someone who identifies as LGBTQ, foster children or anyone who's been part of the foster care system, and children in the juvenile justice system. So some pretty sobering statistics. All right, next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my story, just because I think it's important to highlight what God has done in my life and what God can do. I believe in redemption, I believe in restoration, and suicide was something that I battled, suicidal ideation in particular, I battled for a long time ago. And then it resurfaced, but I'll get to that. And the verse I put up there is Romans 8:28, which my mom back there always calls me her Romans 8:28 girl. And it says, "For God uses all things for the good of those who love him." So I, by the goodness of God, have been an example of that with my story and getting to do this today. I mean, if I hadn't gone through what I had, I don't think I'd be here telling my story like I am, but he redeems and he restores. So anyways, to make a long story, very short, I battled suicidal thoughts throughout my entire youth, adolescence, all that. I'd say they started around the age that I was around the age of 10. And they started kind of like, I don't even remember where this idea came from. That's how insidious it is. I remember one day just all of a sudden thinking, you know what, this is awful. I feel like I'm living in a hell. Why don't I just end it? Like, it came out of nowhere. No one asked me, no one told me, no one saw it. Like, I didn't see anything on the TV. My parents had blockers on the TV. Even if I wanted to watch, like, you know, crazy stuff, I wouldn't. But, you know, it's one of those things where it just came out of nowhere. And looking back, I can identify it very well could have been the enemies, you know, spiritual warfare. I do believe in all of that. I think that it's very, very prominent in those of us who do struggle with mental health. But I say that because, again, it just came out of nowhere. No one had to tell me about it. And that's what the scary thing is too, you know, that we don't have control over what someone feels or what they start hearing, their own internal voice or external voice. So, but I struggled on and off with it for many years. My first, I guess you could say, attempt, or my first kind of go at really seriously trying to do anything was when I was 11. And that was 2 days before my 11th birthday, actually, so I was technically 10, but 2 days before my 11th birthday. And I remember that I was just at my wit's end. I was depressed. I'd been depressed, you know, and when you're a child or an adolescent, what I've learned now is that emotions, they're so big and they feel like they're gonna last forever. And that's something that definitely it felt like, you know, it's like, I think when we start experiencing these things as adults, sometimes, not always, we can put some perspective on it. We know, oh, this happened. Oh, or if there wasn't one particular event that triggered it, we can identify at least, okay, like I know what to do. Like, there are these resources if people want to get help. But when you're 10 or 11, number one, there's that lack of support. I mean, my parents were great. Like, my clinical team was awesome. My family was there for me. I'm very blessed that they were. But, like, I couldn't talk about it with my peers. The concept of peer support is just not there when you're that young, or at least when I was that young. And then in addition to that, you know, you're trying to focus on school, you have all these other external things, and sometimes just the idea of having to sit there and feel sad and mad and whatever these big emotions are, they're just so big. And that's one thing that I think is also kind of a A warning sign when we're looking at the issue of suicide is just in general being younger and experiencing these big emotions, because they really can be a trigger. You know, they're bitter and they're sweet, and sometimes you learn the sweetness later, as I am these days, but it definitely took a lot. But yeah, so my first hospitalization after that was for a week, and then I again struggled with suicidal thoughts that whole summer in 2003. So at the end of the month, I had another 2-week hospitalization, and then I had another hospitalization for 3 or 4 days that same summer. So all at once. And again, it's kind of one of those things where it would come in waves. And I also, one of the hard parts was I found comfort in being at the hospital because people got it. Like, it was, I mean, not to make humor of it, but literally I felt like, wow, I'm not alone. And I'm not the worst one. So some of you might know what I'm talking about, but yeah, it was an experience, I'll put it that way. So I continued to struggle with mental health. I think leading throughout high school and college, I'd say, is when things started to get a little better. And that's actually when I started taking control of my own health, is really when it got better, you know, because as a youth growing up here, you know, parents, you have all that support telling, or at least I did, telling you, oh, you got to take your meds, don't forget this. Like, I was on all kinds of meds, and reminding you, oh, you got to sleep, got to do homework. And then in college, suddenly it was me. And I think that was a very important transition for me. But as with anything to do with mental health, it comes in waves, and it's a lifelong journey. And it's been a lifelong journey. I wish I could tell you that even standing here at 30 years old, that the thought of suicide never crosses my mind. But that'd be a lie. It still pops in every now and again. It does. And I feel like that is something that now I know is a warning sign for myself. And I'm like, oh, gotta look at what this is. And you know, again, I've done personal stuff, I've done professional training, like I know that now. But it is definitely something that is a journey. And I had another suicide attempt more recently in 2019. And that one was related to something else. But my point here is that it's a journey. And on the other side of that journey, though, I've found that it has also been the source of my greatest passion in life. And I guess that's what I want to highlight, is that, you know, for me, going through all that, I started telling my story like I am today. You know, that's something that never would have happened. I started getting really just interested in what's behind suicide, and in noticing this isn't just me, because it's not. Actually, what brought me to the field of social work, sometimes people ask, is that I started working at the Sacramento County morgue because I wanted to be a forensic pathologist. Guess what? Didn't always want to be a social worker. Kind of happened accidentally. But when I interned at the morgue, you know, it just so happened that I noticed more suicides coming in than homicides. And in Sacramento, at least at the time, there was kind of this idea oh, there's so much crime and blah, blah, blah. And really, that's not what I saw. It was crimes against themselves. And I kept seeing these people, and I was like, this could have been me. And so that whole long story that I told you is just to point out that, you know, yes, I've been through a lot in my life, and I think all of us have, but I do think that God redeems, and I do think He restores, and I do think that He can make good of all of this. Even things that maybe your kids are struggling with, things other people are struggling with, He does heal, and that's been my experience. So again, that is me with my personal hat. Now I'm gonna take that off again, and go back to my professional hat, I guess. So yeah, next slide. So I want to talk to you about warning signs, because I feel like that is one of the more important questions that I get is, how do I know? How do I know what's going on with my child, with my person, with my whoever? How do I know? And honestly, every person is going to be so different. But I think when we know those that we love, just on this list, you may see one that stands out. So pay attention to that. So the first one is talking about wanting to die or a preoccupation with death. So that can mean a variety of things. You know, I hate to say that it's still around, but it is. The whole gothic, I don't know, when I was growing up, like Evanescence, like there was this whole emphasis on like emo goth culture. And I think unfortunately that hasn't quite changed. I think, in fact, things have gotten worse, because back then, which was probably 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot around like the concept of cutting and self-mutilation that started coming up. That for sure has only gotten worse. And so I think anything to do with, the idea of something around death, if they talk about death, if they're watching even like morbid stuff on TV and they've got the accompanying mental health, definitely pay attention to that. That would be my suggestion. Internet history. Nowadays, this is a big one. I can't tell you how many people, both adults and children, that I have worked with professionally or families, and they'll say, yeah, like I found all this on their search history. Yeah, because that's how people are finding this information. And I'm 30, like I still consider myself one of the youngins, and I don't even know like where they're getting some of this stuff, but then I do. It's TikTok, it's all the things that, unfortunately we can't shield everyone from. But nonetheless, it's important to, I think, if you're able to, if you have that rapport with your child, to be able to have an open conversation about their internet history. And if you find something, like approach that. Talking about hopelessness. This is a big one. I think that second to straight out saying I'm suicidal, a sense of hopelessness, like I don't think it's ever gonna get better. That is for sure a warning sign for anyone. And if nothing else, even if not a warning sign for suicide, that's a warning they need help. They need something. So paying attention to hopelessness and just kind of that whole world is falling down kind of feeling. And again, when we're in childhood and youth, everything's bigger. Everything feels like the end of the world. And it's important to validate that, but it can definitely be a warning sign. Alcohol and drug use. So this is a big one for me because my last suicide attempt was related to drug use. We hear a lot about, for example, like I think a lot of people hear a lot about alcohol, for example, that when people are under the influence of alcohol, they're more likely to, do a lot of crazy things. But one of them is more impulsive, it brings out this impulsivity. And for me, the drug that I was doing it wasn't when I was on that drug, it's when I was coming down off the drug. And I think sometimes we get very focused on, they're high right now and all this stuff. Really, it's you want to watch when they're coming off of that. There's a huge connection between that, just because that's when the brain levels start to normalize. But I say all that because drug and alcohol use, no matter what age, no matter who it is really a risk factor. And especially if they're doing it more, increased of anything is a red flag. Talking about being a burden and relieving the burden. So one thing that I always mention, because I had a friend who committed suicide, and this is when I was in high school, and before she ended her life, the couple weeks beforehand, she was giving things away. Like I just remember it was like, number one, she seemed to suddenly be in a good mood, like the last one. But also she just started like giving things away, like her belongings, and I never heard her say anything specifically about like, oh yeah, like I won't need this anymore. But I have heard stories where people say that, and any comment that makes it sound like they won't be here tomorrow, definite red flag. Being reckless. That one is kind of goes with the drug and alcohol use, you know, when people don't care, they don't care. It's simple. If they don't care about their body, if they don't care about their mind, that's definitely reason for concern. And then withdrawing from others. If you have a normally very social butterfly teenager or friend or whoever that all of a sudden you never see or that you haven't heard from, like even if they're not suicidal, check in, because that can be a huge sign. But we also want to address it from a place of curiosity and not judgment, which I'll talk about next. Revenge, believe it or not, well, I guess it's pretty easy to believe, revenge is actually a major motivation for suicide. A lot of people that are going through breakups in particular, and again, namely youth related breakups where these emotions feel so big and like they could go on forever, you know, those are one of the times when you want to pay attention to where their headspace is, especially, and again, all of this goes without saying, especially if they have a mental health history or if they've expressed suicidal thoughts, if they've ever talked about depression. And then extreme mood swings. So again, kind of falls under the impulsivity. So that's just another aspect of it. And then the sudden good mood, where all of a sudden it's like they were so low and all of a sudden it's like nothing's happening. And all of a sudden they're like their normal self, or even more like elevated than their normal self. That can be a red flag. Next slide. Perfect. So this brings us to cat. I wish I could call it dog. I'm just gonna say that again because I'm not a cat person. But so I'm gonna go off of this because to me this is just, it encompasses everything that I have ever heard of, everything that I personally experienced, professionally experienced as being things that really help. So the first is connect. And that is just what it sounds like. When you connect with somebody, and I don't care who it is, it could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be your teenager, it could be your kiddo. But when you connect, see what that means for them. So I always say, you know, when you're approaching things from a place of compassion and comfort, you know, I never think of when you're going to talk to someone about their mental health as being like, for example, you're both driving or you know, you're driving them in the car. I wouldn't call that a safe place. You're just walking somewhere where there's a bunch of people around, not a safe place. You want the person to feel comfortable and you want to connect with them. And oftentimes the better way to connect with them is in a place that's comfortable for them. So that's why I put time and place. So pick a time, say, and really make it important for them. Show the interest, show, you know, I've been noticing this and I really just want to get together with you. It'll be an hour. We can go get ice cream. We can go walk at the park, walk our dog, but make it really about you and them and make it intimate. Don't make it something where, you know, I think we see a lot about interventions and I'm just like, no, it doesn't work. So time and place. Then again, this curiosity versus judgment. We say this all the time in mental health, and there's a reason for it, because curiosity is you showing that you're not trying to solve it. They aren't a problem to be solved. You want to know them. You want to know. You're trying to listen to what they're experiencing. So it's a very different thing to be told, you know, I want to know, like, how are you feeling? What's going on with you? I noticed that you have been struggling with doing your homework. I noticed that you and your friend Abby haven't been spending time together as much. What's that about? And really that curiosity piece, instead of, well, I noticed that your grades are going down. I noticed that your friend is never here anymore. What's up with that? There's a different approach. And also, again, any of the judgment, whether it be related to one of their, maybe they are getting bad grades. Maybe you haven't seen Abby, and Abby's the cool friend and who's actually nice and pleasant to be around, and Sonia's not. I don't know. But, you know, judging like, well, I haven't seen her, what'd you do? You know, we all know, I hope, what a good approach to curiosity is versus judgment, and versus coming at it with our own agenda. Because when we ask the person, we are not coming at it with our own agenda. We are really asking them as a person and showing that interest. The next one is to be fearless. So when I say that, that goes with the ask. So be fearless and just ask them. It's, you know, again, we talked about it earlier in the true or false, and I think it is definitely, you know, I get why people are hesitant to ask, are you suicidal? Have you ever thought about suicide? But this needs to be a topic that's as comfortable, that you're as comfortable bringing up as you are about how your pancakes were at breakfast. It really is, because that's what's going to create that comfort, that environment to feel like they can talk to you, or that environment that you feel like you can talk to them and really bring this up. So it's very important. I think if you take nothing else away, take the curious and take the just straight up asking, and also coming at it from a place where it doesn't feel so taboo. You know, you're not like, have you ever been suicidal? Or you aren't like, have you ever been suicidal? Nothing like that. You know, like really just ask it. Be fearless. Have you ever thought about suicide? Are you struggling with this? Are any of your friends talking about ending their lives? Has anyone ever talked about cutting or have suggested that you cut? And it may be uncomfortable for them at first, but you showing that you care and that you really just want to know and you're curious, that in itself would be enough for most people to at least feel comfortable letting you in even that little bit. And that can make all the difference. Asking that question can save someone's life. And I've seen it save lives. And then listen. You know, they might say some stuff that you don't like. They might say things that are hard to hear. They might talk about things that you didn't want to know. But, you know, it's just listen. That's really, when it comes down to it, every suicide and every other issue in this world, everything comes down to, do they have support? Do they have that human connection? That's the one thing that we all cannot live without, second to our relationship with Christ. We cannot live without other people. So same thing applies with our immediate families, you know, and even the ones that are struggling, even the, you know, the hard conversations, they need to start in the family. And then how do they want to treat it? Not how do you want to treat it? Not, oh, you know, I've heard some other parents talk about this medication that's great. Not, oh yeah, I think you need to go to therapy right away. Like, work with them, collaborate with them. What do they want? I mean, obviously all of this has to be in a very age-appropriate context. And I want to also say that I know everyone here probably has different kiddos that are different ages. And I think the important thing is approaching it, also taking that into consideration. So like, you know, the idea, and also just the context of what's happening in their life. Like for a lot of kids that are younger, like when I was 10 years old, for example, even going to therapy, like honestly, I really there was a time when I needed it. But other times, like what would have been helpful for me would have literally just been even counseling. Like, oh, I would have said, I think it'd be helpful if I could go run around the field with somebody, you know, like it's so individual, but I think it's important to collaborate with who we're working on and really address it from a person-centered and age-appropriate way. You know, social work, that's a huge thing that we discuss, is things have to be person-centered or individual-centered. Treatment for anything, drugs, alcohol, medication, mental health, like physical health, none of it is one size fits all. Let's be real, even clothing is not one size fits all. So this whole one size fits all, it's gotta stop, it's gotta stop. And then lastly, safety plan. This is also a very, very important point. And this is one that there are tons of resources out there for too. But I always recommend after you've had that conversation about suicide, and especially if they disclose, like, yeah, I've thought about it, or I've heard about it, or my friend Angie does this, or, you know, she's told me X, create a plan around it so that you feel like you can circle back to that conversation, because it can literally save their life. It can save a friend's life. And if you continue that built rapport, you know, my goal from doing this presentation is that every single person would walk out and feel like they can have this conversation with someone they care about, and that even when that maybe period or that wave of things is over, that they can still continue to have those types of conversations, those hard conversations. So yeah, safety plan, really the basis of this, and we do it at my work all the time, is, you know, we decide, okay, if you start feeling this way, if you start experiencing this, if you decide, hey, I want to try cutting, if you decide, yeah, I'm thinking about pills, if you decide, you know, when you ask those questions, when they disclose things, really just creating a safety plan at its most basic, I guess, sense would be really establishing, okay, when are you feeling this way? What do I do? Who else can I contact? Those are really the big ones. It's number one, well, I'd say two, like learning to recognize, because a certain part of it is self-awareness, right? Like it also causes them to have to pay attention, but also just based on what they tell you, being able to say, okay, when I start noticing the warning signs that you've given me, what do you want me to do? And these are the things that I can do. So for example, just a very basic example from something from my own childhood would be, you know, Mom, when I start going to my room and isolating, that is a warning sign. And so from that warning sign, I would say, you know, that's when I'm likely thinking about these things. And then for my mom, when she sees that, she knows to come ask me. Or on the flip side of that, you can make a request that they come and tell you, hey, I'm struggling with XYZ. Hey, I think I do need to call the hospital. I think I do need to call the hotline. There are several ways to do it. And again, there's tons of examples out there. But as long as the overall concept is that you're showing that you care about them, you care what happens, you have a plan. So if they start feeling that way, they know they can come to you, and they know that from there, that you guys have a plan on what to do. So if that for them means like, yeah, I want you to call the crisis line with me, or yeah, that means I really need to take a time out and just go with you to get ice cream, whatever that means for them. And again, it's very individual. To each person, it's going to be very individual. I will say that when I'm thinking about the kind of the safety planning, the example that also comes to mind is how many of you are familiar with like an advance directive or like healthcare directive? Perfect. So I kind of think of it like a mental health care directive. So if you're familiar with the advanced healthcare directive in medical terms, that's when you basically name another person to make decisions on your behalf, or it kind of goes over with the living will, the whole process of, okay, like when this happens, these are how I'd like for people to take care of me medically. So do you want all the interventions? Do you want no interventions? Obviously at this, with kids and adults who are dealing with mental health, it is different because we're not looking at all that. But what we are looking at is how do you want me to address this with you? What is going to work for you? What is my desire when I'm having a hard time? So I guess that's kind of the concept that I want us to take from this, is just, it's not one size fits all. It's something that, you know, it can be also like constantly ongoing, like, and it can change. It's not something that all of a sudden, you know, you have to keep forever, because you figure they might, now that they're having these conversations with you, become even more aware of kind of their own triggers. So anyways, again, there are many ways to go over that, but I'd say that that is, again, one of the more important things is safety planning and really coming up with a strategy for when someone says they're suicidal. Because if someone says they're suicidal and you internally panic, that's not gonna help. So it's good to have some kind of a plan. And then, yeah, I think that's the biggest, So some of the resources that I wanna point out in particular, so NAMI, and actually I highlight some of these in particular because they are very easy to access. So NAMI has an international, national, state, and county chapters. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they have an amazing amount of resources. They also, I actually was trained to do NAMI presentations in Sacramento, so they have presenters that also either have experienced their own mental health condition or families or survivors of suicide or whatever. They have all those folks that can come talk to you. They have groups, they're an amazing resource, and they also have kind of this guide to just getting started. Sometimes that's all we need, is to know how to get started with getting care. The next one is Active Minds. That one is specifically for young adults and youth. That one is very much so, it's, I'd say, very focused on college, but they have a lot of good resources in general. And especially for kids that are maybe getting closer to college age, it's a great resource to have. And they have chapters on certain college campuses too. And then Living Works. So I got training through Living Works for a program called ASSIST, which is Assisted Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And it's basically a very long acronym for, this is what happens when you're in that moment with someone who says, I want to die, and who has a plan, who has all that. It's kind of a way to triage. So yeah, that's a really important one too. And again, I kind of didn't go into it, but I'm sure I could do another talk sometime about what happens if someone says, yes, I have a plan, and kind of the next steps with all that. But I think that's probably another conversation for another day. But obviously, if someone says that they have a plan, definitely get help right away. Sorry, a little sidebar. But the national hotline for suicide and suicidal thoughts is the 1-800-273-TALK. I believe they might be changing it soon. I don't remember what they're changing it to, but my understanding is that there's going to be either a new number or extension to press or something. So TBD on that. And then especially for kids and adolescents with cell phones, which unfortunately is like everyone these days, they can text BRAVE to 741-741, and that's basically like a crisis line. And it's good because anything to do with the phone, obviously they can track kind of where it's coming from and have a general idea. So that's actually a very good way for someone who really needs help or to talk, to have very easy access without having to call, without having to do all that. It's just a quick text. So those are just a few resources of the many that I've accumulated. And yeah, hopefully those will be helpful. And then lastly, connect with me. So I want to apologize in advance because nighttime is not my time. I'm a morning person. So if I seem to ramble or I don't know, whatever I was doing, I apologize in advance. I'm a morning person. That said, I am always happy to talk with you, whether it's morning or probably before like 8:00 p.m. But you can email me. My email's up there, williamsk337@gmail.com. And then on Instagram, I'm in the process of actually starting a coaching business specifically around kind of mental health system navigation. So if you do have questions, and obviously right now I'm going to be looking for beta clients. So if at some point you are interested, or just in general, if you just want to know, like, hey, I know someone who's struggling, but I don't know how to get started, or I know that my kiddo's friend is struggling with this, how do I XYZ? I'm happy to help. Sometimes people really, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to even distinguish, well, what's a therapist? What's a psychiatrist? What's a psychologist? There are all these different terms. And I, thankfully, personally and professionally, have been through that rodeo many a times. So if you need help with kind of navigating that, I'm happy to help, always. And then I put my cell phone up there too. Don't worry, I put on silent at night. So if you do reach out, just please tell me who you are, where you found me, and know that I probably won't respond till the next morning. But other than that, I'd like to open it up for questions or for feedback or for anything that you guys want to ask. And please know I am an open book. There's really nothing you can ask me that I probably won't answer. Although I am at church, so I'll try to make it, without some of the cuss words or whatever. Anyway, yes. Yes.
Would you address what seems to be this declining age, the increase in interest in suicide? What seems to be happening here? I mean, you would think that younger kids wouldn't be as concerned. Maybe some life issues like deaths in the family or some other struggle.
Yeah.
Can you address that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to say. I will say a lot of the cases that I have, so we all know, I think that for some mental illnesses in particular, there's a genetic component. For others, it's more the environmental. Just talking from my own personal experience, I did have depression, but there was nothing that caused that. I had a great childhood. My parents, you probably know them, they're amazing. It just was there. And I think what's gotten worse is several factors in our environment, which is less connection with other people, more connection to our phones, more connection to people that are influencing us outside of our people, it's so easy now, even when it comes to going to church, we can watch church virtually now. We don't have to actually connect. Just we don't have to actually see a therapist. We can watch, we can listen to podcasts or watch Instagram reels about it and call it therapy. I think there's a lot of that going on where kids are just kind of getting the idea that for everything, good or bad, that they kind of know what's going on. And unfortunately, there's a dark side to that. And just like we can self-educate on things and think that we know about them, same with darkness, same with dark things like death and all that. So that's just one possible answer. But I have noticed that especially where there's peer involvement and social media involvement, that's where I've seen a large increase, and also a presence in the darkness. So dark themed Facebook groups or, just some stuff like that. Yes.
At what age? So because you said it was 9 or 10 or something,
Mm-hmm.
it just came to you or something. But my question would be, my husband and I have differing opinions. His is all about don't say it to the kids and stuff like that, because then you're going to put it in their mind and they're going to think it's normal or this or that. But for me, I kind of want to be a little more open because I want them to be able to come to me. They're a lot younger than that, but they're coming of age. And I can see with meltdowns or whatever it is, there's things that are not being dealt with and maybe not awareness is not as good because they're so young.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to learn for myself to teach them also. So at what age is it okay to talk about it, or don't bring it up until they bring it up, or until you see your signs? What would you think?
Yeah, so again, want to preface this, I'm not a parent to any year-old except for a dog. And the dog, thankfully, will listen to me no matter what I say. At least I think. But when it comes to that, I personally, and I don't know if it's because I'm biased based on everything I've seen, again, young people trying to commit suicide, and I see them literally in the hospital. I don't think there's an age too young. If the conversation of death comes up, if we're talking about death at all, if we're talking about loss, if we're talking about grief, I think that it's only natural that we talk about something like this. And, you know, obviously as a parent, you know your kids better than anybody else, and you know what they're ready for. But I do think it's important to bring it up a lot earlier than we are. The problem I think that a lot of us run into is that just like our society, you know, we're an intervention-based society. We're not a prevention-based society. You know, it's like we don't really care what's going on until something happens and we have to deal with it.
So that's where I'm trying to get in that preventive, but at the same time, I don't want to put in their mind.
Yeah.
Which is where I'm teetering
Yeah.
on this, like.
Well, did you see the first true or false question? Were you here for that?
I know I
Okay. So the interesting thing, to recap for anyone else who also like missed it, one of the things that I brought up was one of the biggest myths about suicide is that if you talk about it or if you bring it up, that's going to cause them to want to or to do it or to think about it. That's one of the biggest myths. It's totally false. Yeah, and in fact, we want to be the ones to bring it up to people before they learn about it from peers. So I guess the sooner that you think they're going to interact with peers, it's important to talk to them first. Yeah. Who else? Yes.
I have a question on your cat steps. One of
Yeah.
the things you said was ask them how they want to treat it.
Mm-hmm.
What if, because when I was much younger in college,
Yeah.
you know, stumbled upon a roommate and we had this situation and they don't want to treat it.
Yeah.
And they don't want you to tell anyone. What do you recommend?
So, first of all, if it's an adult, because it sounds like they must have been an adult.
Yeah, they were close to you.
Yeah, so with an adult, I don't care what someone says. If they say they're going to end their life, that's one of those circumstances where even as a social worker, if someone tells me, hey, I need you to not tell anyone, but I've been really thinking about doing this, or I'm feeling suicidal, especially if they mention like a plan, at that point, like I need to tell. I don't care what you say. With a child, it's actually almost better because they're a minor. And so even if they say, I don't want help, like there are some circumstances where they kind of have to. They're a minor. That's one of the blessings, and a curse, but it's a blessing, you know, that they have someone who consents for that. Because once they reach that age of 18, unless they're on an involuntary hold that forces them to be there, they can just check out. So in the case of youth, I would say, yes, address it the way they want to have it addressed if they're trying to have it addressed. But if it's something and it feels off, it feels life or death, it feels like, you know, that they need that help, I would say, and it feels imminent like that, like it sounds like, yeah, don't even question it. Just get help.
So when you say get help, you mean like mental health, like drive them?
No, not so. What I usually recommend is if someone has a mental health emergency, is literally call 911, or if not 911, they do have like mobile crisis. But I think all that you can still access with 911. In fact, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, in Santa Clara County, when you call, if you say this is a mental health emergency, then they'll already like have people that they can dispatch to you. And when they come out, they'll be the ones to evaluate. Because yeah, dropping them off at like EPS or Kaiser or whatever, they actually usually can't just take them that way. There's like kind of avenues that they have to go through first. And that's usually so that they can establish care after the hospital. But yeah, there are always people like 24 hours, 24/7, like ready to triage. And actually, one resource that I should have put up there, but I didn't. So I work at an adult crisis stabilization unit through an organization called Momentum for Health, which it's called the CSU. And their unit is specifically for people ages 18 and up. And the idea behind it is it's a 24/7 year-round like facility, dorm style. You know, they have multiple beds. I think now they have like 6 at the facility I work at. But basically they're referred through police, through mobile crisis, and the whole idea is for someone who, for example, doesn't have a plan, isn't immediately gonna just go kill themselves and don't have, like I said, a plan, then the whole idea is that we take them in and try to prevent them from getting over that edge. So it's kind of like stabilize the crisis, because most of the time, and I should have mentioned this too, most of the time, people who commit suicide or try to attempt, they almost always like regret it the minute that they do it. In like I'd say 90 to 95% of cases, I've heard people express remorse. And this is also professionally, like seeing people wake up and hearing, other people's stories. Same with mine. Like, I didn't die, but when I made my attempt and I realized, oh my gosh, like I'm not dead, I was glad. And it's kind of that space in between that matters. So I say all that because there's also, I believe in Santa Clara County, through an organization called Uplift, they have a crisis stabilization unit for kids. And there, it's kind of the same thing. It's for kids that don't necessarily need to go on an involuntary hold and go to the hospital right now, but they could get to that point. And from there, if they're at the facility and they're like, yeah, I'm ready to die, I'm gonna go out there and do whatever, then they'll send them to the hospital. But there are those types of resources too that are kind of like a step before, so you don't go through that whole process. But there are tons of great professionals to triage. Yeah.
So, in your experience, what, I guess, signs, or when do you see signs where, like a family or a youth minister would want to require professional intervention?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think it becomes a really sticky topic because, especially in the church, or at least I know growing up, and in general, we're taught Jesus is all you need, like pray away, pray it all away. I believe fiercely in the power of prayer. I do. I believe it works. And in fact, at my other church, we're doing a whole series on it, and I really think it works. But I think sometimes we need that and I think that there's kind of the way that you can tease it out is how much of this is leaning towards like our agenda. So like, oh, I really want, like, how do I explain it? Like, I really want this person to, like, I want Jesus to heal them. I want them to have that restoration. And how much of it is really just they need help, because at a certain point, when it comes to anything like diagnosis, that can't be done at church. Like, they're not billed for it. It's not even a thing. When it comes to things that are life or death, like I think, and I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, DJ, because obviously you're a pastor, but I think in the case of someone who is like a pastor or a leader working with someone who's discussing or mentioning suicidal thoughts or whatever, at what point do you think you step out? That's probably better for you to answer.
So, as someone working at the church with youth, we're mandating orders, and so we hear somebody say something like, hey, I'm thinking of hurting myself. I had situations where I called CPS, and honestly, there's been times where they go, hey, that's not reportable, or that's not a serious enough claim by the child. And we go, okay, but usually we'll cover our butts. If there's any hint of a plan, we have to call, or we're liable legally. But anyway, with that too, we do want to bring the parents in. Hey, there's some tough things going on. I'm not sure where of them. But legally, you have to call when certain things are brought up. Yeah.
Does that answer your question at all?
Or even if you're a parent of a child, maybe you're doing some of the steps in CAP, but then at one point, do you need to, maybe we need to bring in a counselor, or we need to bring in someone professional to draw it out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think this can be kind of like I think it can be, they're not mutually exclusive. I think it's important even to have Kat be going on for you as a family, and also working in tandem with like a plan of like, okay, what are we gonna do? We should bring in a counselor and discuss that. And at some point, I mean, it might be evident, like either if they're not like they're not really receptive to therapy, or they're not really receptive to getting professional help at a certain point. I mean, yeah, I'd say if they're bringing up suicide, if they're talking about plans, if you get that gut feeling, yeah, I think it's important to have them kind of both at the same time, or to have one like kind of on backup, or, you know, on standby, so that you know kind of who to call if your conversation with Kat goes south. I think, yeah, I hope that helps a little bit. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
So you had a different age time when you had depression. So I want to know, like, what triggered you to be so depressed? You know, the childhood is usually like happy and parents school and there are lots of activities. What made so depressed?
Yeah. So for me, honestly, a lot of it, my depression came from my other mental health stuff, which was OCD. So I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and a lot of my triggers were around that. So because my OCD had gotten so severe, I became severely depressed. And yeah, it's hard to kind of, there's so much to that, but it was a lot of my OCD. That said, at other points in my life, I mean, depression has just come up. And depression's so different from just like, I'm blue, you know, like it is, at some points in my life, it's been debilitating. Like it feels like there are weights on my ankles and I can't walk. And there really isn't like a real cause for it. It just, you know, it's a disorder. I try to explain it to people, like, you know how sometimes people have either like autoimmune disorders, for example. You can have flare-ups. If you don't, like, you know, I know my cousin who had MS, for example, multiple sclerosis. They had her on like a gluten-free diet, and whenever she'd follow this diet, whenever she followed the care plan for her, she would feel fine. Like her symptoms would be just fine. But whenever when something was off, so like her diet was off, or if she had additional stress, or even if she was just like feeling unbalanced, then, you know, she'd start to flare up. So it can really be, it's a lot like physical health, and that sometimes there is a cause, sometimes there's not. I also compare it to a car. I used to always say it's kind of like a car on the road. Like you're trying to drive down a road, and every now and again, you got to get the oil change. And if you miss the oil change, well, at some point you're gonna have to get it. But sometimes, you know, you're just driving along and you get a nail in the tire. Some things are unpredictable. Sometimes it just is. And as kids, I think the same is very true. Because again, like you said, as a kid, I had mental health stuff, but like from the outside, things were great. I mean, my parents, awesome. I had the most amazing grandparents. I had everything basically at my feet. I had housing, I had food. I'm one of the lucky ones. And even still, you know, that's the thing. Mental illness, depression, it doesn't discriminate, sadly.
So I was trying to figure out, is it like some bullying causes the depression in kids, like if they don't have OCD?
So I think kids, so it really depends, because I think there are some kids that literally it just like for adults, like it just happens. Nothing causes it, it's just there. It could be, they do see like a genetic link. So for example, if you have like even someone far along in the like blood relative line that had depression, even if they never told you, that can also trigger it. Sometimes it's just there. And I know it's hard to hear. Because I mean, to us, like there is a cause for everything, right? That's how we conceptualize it. But yeah, unfortunately with the brain, there's a lot that we don't know still, so.
Actually, somebody died in my son's school. I think it's just August when
Yeah.
we went to India for the vacation. So the son was like borderline, I think autistic.
Okay.
And then they had the new baby.
Yeah.
So the older one was 15 years old. My son's friend. So he suicided in India. So
Yeah.
So Indian school didn't tell us anything about that.
Yeah.
But my son was questioned by the parents, like, are you guys were trying to say something like bullying or something like that? So that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there's so many misconceptions about it out there, you know, and it can be a very internal struggle. It can be a very, unfortunately, group struggle. Like we hear about those, whatever they're called, the like group suicides or whatever. Like, you know, it's unfortunately, yeah, it's hard to really say what causes it for a lot of people too.
So what lifted you out of the depression?
I would say a lot of work on myself, but also a lot of Jesus. You know, honestly, a lot of it's just Jesus. There was a time in my life where I didn't think I would ever graduate college, let alone get a master's degree. You know, I thought I was going to commit suicide by the age of 16. I always told myself that I'm only going to live till maybe 16. And here I am at 30. You know, I wish I could say what really lifted me out of it, but I think it was literally just Jesus. And just like he's done with like my addiction and stuff, you know, and of course there are factors along the way. Like I have a support system and that helped. I have faith that really helped. I have an education now. I have people who cared about me and who listened. And those are all factors, but really there's nothing that was the aha, like that did it. It was just a lot of hard work, a lot of perseverance, and a whole lot of Jesus. So, yeah.
So for me, I think I have questions. I felt like I have suicide thoughts during the age of growing up from 10 to 16. I outgrown it. I think it's parents trigger because they set the expectation so high that you feel like, you know, if I can't make this exam, I'm die. You know? So I'm just thinking, does parents need to set expectation without causing stress to kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point, that I think overall our desire as kids especially is we want, like, I mean, our basic desire is obviously human connection. We want to feel love. And the problem that arises is when we feel like love is conditional upon.
You're not good enough.
Yeah, like I'm not good enough. They want this, I can't do that. I think that's where a lot of suicidal thoughts start. So yeah, I think that's a major point, is that, you know, when it comes to expectations, you know, really looking at someone and what they are capable of at that time. I think, you know, especially for people who are well, I'll say for myself, when I was really depressed and struggling in school, I remember I got a C in chemistry. And thankfully, my parents, they were just so happy I passed. But if I would have been under the impression that if I don't get straight A's, then I'm not going to college and my life is going to fall to crap and blah, blah, blah. If I would have felt all that, I don't know what it would have been like. Because my parents just said, do your best and we'll take your best. And that was my best. At that time, that was my best. I did get A's in college. High school, maybe not. But